It's 10:01. We may have some people join late, but want to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for AARP Virginia's 2026 legislative session preview. We're excited to be here with you today. My name is Jared Calfee. I'm the State Advocacy Director for AARP Virginia, and I will kick it over quickly to Debbie Taylor to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Debbie Taylor. I'm the state advocacy team lead, and welcome.
And then you'll also see we have Lizzie Cushing with us. She's a part of our advocacy team here in our state office as well. Both Lizzie and Debbie will be helping kind of monitor the Q&A as we go along here, and making sure that your questions are getting addressed and answered. And we will do our best to take all the questions that we can, but we'll see how many we get because we do have a decent amount to get through today. So before I dive into our legislative agenda for the 2026 session, I wanted to talk just briefly about how development of this agenda happens at AARP, to give you a little bit of insight into that process. AARP has a national office located in Washington, D.C., and then we have state offices in all 50 states, as well as D.C., Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Those state offices work with the national office, but we also have a good bit of autonomy in terms of our advocacy and legislative work. And so policy starts kind of at the top and then comes down to the states. But within that sort of broad framework, we have a lot of say in what issues that we work on. At AARP's national office, we have what's called OPDI, or the Office of Policy Development Integration. Those are the folks who sort of develop what is called the AARP Policy Book. The Policy Book is a public document that you can check out. I encourage you to do so. You can just go in your web browser and Google AARP Policy Book, and there you will find a wealth of information about AARP's position on a huge array of policy issues, more than one state office could ever work on their own. As an organization that represents the 50 plus and their families and works on issues that impact the 50 plus and their families, you can imagine that is a whole lot of issues. So we have policy in areas that might surprise you. And so go through that policy book and take a look at some point. But that's kind of the foundation for what we do at AARP. And when we are developing our policy at the state office level, that is like, that's our Bible. That's what we're making sure that we are working off of. Anything that we work on at the state level has to align with AARP's overall policies and be found kind of within the policy book. But within that framework, we can kind of pick and choose what we work on at the state level. And there's a number of considerations that go into that. Ultimately, our state director, Jim Dow, and our executive council of volunteers are kind of the folks in charge of the direction of our state office. Jim and I work together and talk through our policy issues as well as the rest of our advocacy team at AARP Virginia to figure out what we're going to work on. And there are a lot of considerations that go into it. We think about kind of what the political environment is and who's in power and what their priorities are likely to be. We think about what issues we have worked on in the past. It's useful as an advocacy organization to have some amount of consistency from year to year in terms of the issue areas that you work in, and not jumping around from thing to thing and no one ever knowing what it is that you're going to be doing. But at the same time, we do take up new issues each year, and we are always trying to have the most impact that we can for our 1 million members here in the Commonwealth. And so when an issue arises and we say that will have a huge impact on our members, if that's something that we can get done, that is often going to rise to the top of our attention and something that we're going to want to engage on, even if it's not an area that we've engaged on before. Policy and policy change is often a multi-year battle. These legislative sessions happen once a year, but often you have to come back to an issue time after time after time to get it across the finish line. And in some cases, you move the ball a little bit further forward each year before you finally get it done. In other cases, you may take up an issue for the first time and get it done in a single year, which is always a pleasant treat when you don't have to return to something again and again and again. But at the same time, when something takes years of work, finally getting it done is really satisfying. And you'll hear about a number of issues this year that we are working on, that we have worked on in the past. And so with that, I want to go ahead and dive into our legislative agenda for 2026. Like I said, Debbie is going to be monitoring the Q&A. If you have questions as we go along, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A. As I get through each issue that I'm going to talk about today, I will pause momentarily and answer any questions that have come up about that issue. Because if we saved everything for the end, it would just be too much for you all to remember. So we will take questions sort of as we go along here. So if you have a question, pop it into the chat. Also, please know that I am going to give an overview of each of these issues. My intent is not to get deep into the weeds on each of them because, frankly, you all don't need to know absolutely everything about each of these policies, but I want you to understand what the policy is, what the intent is, what the impact will be, and kind of what our plan is for trying to get it through in the 2026 legislative session. So I am going to share my screen and we will go ahead and get started here. And Debbie, can you confirm for me that we've got the legislative agenda up on the screen for everybody?
I can confirm that.
All right. So this document is going to be a digital document that is available to everybody. We will send this out to everybody who's attending today in a digital version. I will say that we are still making a few final tweaks to things. Within the General Assembly, the work on bills goes right up until the start of the session and then continues on through the session. So there are a few things that we are still hammering out language on right now. And then there are things that may come up that are high priority issues that we aren't yet aware of. So this is kind of a living document for the time being, but we're hoping to finalize it in the very near future. And once it is final, we will send a digital copy out to everybody. We're also going to print copies of this that will be delivered to each member of the Virginia General Assembly so that they have a very clear understanding of what our legislative priorities are for the 2026 session. We have this document divided into four broad issue categories. The first is prescription drug affordability. The second is caregiving. The third is financial security. And the fourth is livable communities. So I will go through kind of in those four sections today as we talk through this. And we'll start with prescription drug affordability. Those of you who have paid some attention to AARP's work over recent years will know that this has been a huge issue at both the national and the state level for AARP. At the national level, AARP worked very hard on the Inflation Reduction Act and ensuring the changes in prescription drug law that were included in that, such as Medicare being able to negotiate prescription drug prices, out-of-pocket caps, things like that. At the state level here in Virginia, our priority the last several years has been to pass legislation creating a prescription drug affordability board. What that would be is a state board that takes a look at the cost of medicine and determines if there are medicines that are basically unaffordable for the people that need them. And if the state determines that that is the case, they would have the authority to set what's called an upper payment limit on those high-cost prescription drug products. An upper payment limit is essentially a cap on the price that anybody in the state is allowed to pay for that drug. And that applies throughout the entire prescription drug supply chain, right? Well, from the top, from the drug manufacturers, all the way down to the pharmacy counter. Other states have created these boards, and it has frankly been a struggle to kind of get them off the ground because of both political challenges and legal challenges that they have faced. But what we are seeing in the states that have created these is they have now kind of finally made it through some of those challenges and are in the process of starting to set upper payment limits. The first upper payment limit in the country was set in Colorado on a drug called Enbrel. The typical cost for that drug on an annual basis is about $60,000, and that upper payment limit will reduce that to about $31,000. So we're talking about a very significant reduction in cost there. And there are a lot of benefits to setting these UPLs. Our state and local governments pay a lot of money for prescription drugs, and so having a UPL in place will save taxpayers money by saving state and local governments money. It will reduce premium costs for people because as those upper payment limits apply throughout the prescription drug supply chain, the savings have to be passed along to consumers. And so if if a health insurance company saves money because of an upper payment limit, they have to pass that savings along to consumers in the form of lower premiums. And then somebody paying, out of pocket at the pharmacy counter for a drug would save money with the upper payment limit as well. Not surprisingly, this is a policy that is strongly supported by the public. We did a poll on a number of policy issues earlier this year, and we found that 84% of Virginians support this policy. We asked the same question in 2023, and it was 75% support. So support has been strong for years, but it's only going up. And that support cuts across party lines. It's overwhelmingly supported by Democrats, Republicans, and independents. This legislation has passed the legislature with bipartisan support in the last two General Assembly sessions, and both years it was vetoed by Governor Youngkin. So our hope is that with a new governor coming in, we will finally be able to get this one across the finish line. And that would be just a huge win for consumers and for people taking prescription medications here in the Commonwealth, which is a huge number of people. And it's not just the 50 plus, it's people, of all ages take a lot of prescription medications and are really struggling to pay for them. So this will be an impactful thing and something that we're really excited about the prospect of getting across the finish line this year. Debbie, do we have any questions in the Q&A about the Prescription Drug Affordability Board?
Not at this time.
All right, I must have explained it perfectly then. I will say that as we go along, if you have a question on a previous issue, pop it into the Q&A and we will try and come back to it if we need to. All that said about Prescription Drug Affordability Board legislation, it is not a silver bullet for solving the prescription drug affordability crisis, and candidly, that there is no silver bullet for that. It is just something that is going to take a lot of work in a lot of issue areas to have an impact on. And so the second thing that you'll see here on this page is not a specific bill that we're supporting, but more broadly policy ideas that we support. And you'll see a mixture of those two things throughout this document. Some of these things are specific bills that we are working on, and some of them are things that we are supportive of and would like to see happen and would support legislation in that vein.
Jared, so, we have two questions.
Okay, go ahead.
The first is, do we know why Youngkin vetoed this previously? Any reason given?
Yeah, so he cited some of the challenges that other states have faced, which I mentioned that, in other states, they've passed these. Maryland was the first one to do it, and they just had a whole host of problems for a number of reasons getting it kind of up and running. And so his argument was essentially like, look, Maryland did this and they haven't saved any money yet. Other states like Colorado and Minnesota, we've seen move much quicker and more efficiently. And we think that those states have kind of charted a path that will make this a much easier thing for Virginia to actually get up, running, and setting upper payment limits as soon as possible. The other thing I think is an ideological issue that he had with, the government setting prices in the free market. But I would argue that prescription drugs are a very different thing than, say buying a car. If you go to buy a car and the cost is too expensive, you won't buy the car. You'll go to another dealership and buy it there. And as such, the free market will drive prices to a place where things are affordable. Prescription drugs are things that people need to survive in a lot of cases. And in a lot of cases, you may not have options of different drugs that you can shop around. There may only be one drug that treats your specific illness and helps keep you alive. And so you are essentially forced to pay whatever the cost is. And it gives drug manufacturers the ability to price gouge customers. And that is just, that's not the Virginia that I want to live in. And I don't think it's the Virginia that most people want to live in based on how many people we see supporting this issue. And so anyway, those were the arguments in his veto statement.
Okay, the second question is, who will be appointed to PDAB?
So the legislation sets some guidelines around like who makes the appointments and who goes onto the board and all that. And you don't need to know all the details of that, but I will say the key is these are going to be experts in the pharmaceutical supply chain, but they will not be people coming from a drug manufacturer or PBM, some of the actual players in the supply chain. So they will be coming from a place of objectivity and not kind of advocating for a specific industry within the supply chain. So that's who would compose the board. Are experts who have the ability to be subjective in setting these upper payment limits. Any other questions?
No, that was it.
Awesome. Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, and so the second piece here, again, returning to the idea that PDAB is a help and makes a difference, but is not a silver bullet solution to the problem, is increasing transparency throughout the prescription drug supply chain and exploring other opportunities to reduce consumer costs. We worked on legislation a couple of years ago around pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs, who are kind of the middlemen, and their purpose is to negotiate on behalf of consumers and bring prices down, and that has not always been what we have seen happen in practice. And so we worked on legislation a couple of years ago to try and make that process more transparent. We've also looked at options such as bulk purchasing, where in some cases, either within a state or between states, they will pool their purchasing power to negotiate lower drug prices. There are pools of different states that come together and do that. Those are things that we'd be interested in looking at. Anything that has the opportunity to really bring down prices for consumers is something that we would be open to considering in this space.
So we just got a third question from Irv Varconi. Besides PDAB, will AARP support legislation to curb the power of pharmacy benefit managers?
Yeah, and it would depend on the legislation. One thing I will say about PBMs is they are a middleman within the drug supply chain, and they have contributed in some ways to higher drug costs. But they have also made for a very useful scapegoat for the drug manufacturers. The drug manufacturers are the primary drivers of prescription drug costs, and they have fairly successfully pointed towards PBMs and said, no, they're the real problem here. We have nothing to do with why your drugs are expensive. And that is just flatly untrue. And so what we've seen is there are a lot of PBM bills that will come up that are meant to try to reduce costs for consumers, but in practice, that's not the impact that they would have. And so we would be open to looking at any bill that comes up around regulating PBMs and increasing transparency and saving consumers money. But we would take a close look at it to make sure that that's actually what the impact of the drug would be, of the legislation would be. And so it would depend, like with any legislation, it would depend on if it aligns with our policy. And our policy is we will support legislation that has a direct and positive impact for consumers. Whereas a lot of this legislation ends up being kind of infighting between the various entities within the supply chains, such as, pharmacies, hate the PBMs, and the PBMs and fight with the manufacturers, and the manufacturers fight with the PBMs. And we aren't here to pass legislation on behalf of pharmacists. We're here to pass legislation on behalf of consumers. And so that's the angle that we would look at any legislation through.
We've got two more questions if you have time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Will AARP support other drug bills like Delegate Delaney's bill capping costs of diabetes supplies like glucose monitoring?
I'm not familiar with that specific bill. Delegate Delaney is the patron for our Prescription Drug Affordability Board legislation, so something I'd be interested in speaking with her about for sure. And Senator Deeds is the Senate patron, by the way. I didn't mention that on PDAB, but it's something that we would take a look at. But I can't speak to that specific legislation.
Okay, another question is from Connie Skaggs. It is my understanding that drug costs are high because of marketing versus research, as claimed by pharma. Is it true?
Yeah, pharma will always say, well, drug costs are high because it's really expensive to do research and development for these drugs, and so we have to recoup our expenses somehow. And there is a an acorn of truth in that. But there's a lot that is left out of that, and part of what's left out is that they spend more money on marketing and television commercials for these drugs than they spend on research and development, and they spend a huge amount on lobbying and trying to kill bills like PDAB at the state level and the IRA at the federal level. And so additionally, a lot of research and development around these drugs is subsidized by taxpayers through NIH and other government grants. And there's also some data on smaller companies doing a lot of the R&D, and then bigger companies buying up that research and then using it to develop drugs that they haven't actually put the full investment into. So there is a little truth in the cost of research and development, and certainly we want our drug manufacturers to continue being at the cutting edge of research and development. And the whole reason that we're here is because the drugs that they have created are so great in so many cases, and so many people depend on them to live lives that they want to live. And so we're obviously in favor of that. We want them to continue bringing drugs like that to the market and allowing people's lives to be better. But if you develop this great drug that nobody can afford, then what was the point? You're not actually doing a good for the public at that point.
Ben Crawford has, how do patent laws apply to drugs?
That's a long answer that I'm not fully going to get into. I will say that the drug manufacturers have been really effective at manipulating patent laws and laws around things like orphan drugs. The Orphan Drug Act was created to incentivize pharmaceutical manufacturers to develop drugs that treat rare diseases. They have kind of found loopholes there by bringing drugs to market as an orphan drug where they get all kinds of subsidies and government support. And then once it's brought to market, they discover that, it actually treats 100 other very common illnesses. And so they can increase their market share on that drug. And same thing with patent laws. They will get a patent on a drug to where a generic manufacturer cannot make a generic of that drug for a certain period of time. And they will often find ways to extend those protections by making small tweaks to the drug here and there so that they are essentially the only game in town and can charge essentially whatever they want for that drug over a period of time. All right. And if there's no more questions on that section, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Debbie, are we all good on the Q&A?
We are all good.
All right. So the next portion here is supporting aging Virginians and their caregivers. We have done a lot of research at AARP on caregivers both nationwide and here in Virginia. The most recent research that we have in Virginia found that there's about 1.5 million Virginians currently serving as caregivers for loved ones. That's almost a quarter of the adult population. And I would mention as well that of those caregivers, about 57% of them are working. And that is what brings us to our first issue on here, which is instituting a paid family and medical leave program for Virginia workers. The current protection that we have in Virginia is federal legislation, the federal FMLA, as you heard, Federal Medical Leave Act. And what that does is essentially guarantees you unpaid time off for certain circumstances, like caring for a child or a loved one. But the key word there is unpaid. And for a lot of workers, particularly low income workers, people on an hourly wage, that's not a possibility. You can't take extended period of time off of work to care for a loved one if it means that you aren't going to get paid, because then you're having to choose between caring for a loved one or paying your rent or keeping food on the table. And so what this program would do would be to establish basically a state-run insurance program for paid family and medical leave, wherein a person could take up to 12 weeks of paid leave from work to care for a loved one, and they would receive 80% of their regular pay during that time period. As I mentioned, 57% of our caregivers work. This is an issue that I've seen firsthand in my own family when my mom, who was a school teacher, quit her job as a school teacher because she had to take care of her aging father who was dealing with Parkinson's disease, essentially full time. So, and that's not an uncommon story. That's something we hear about from members and people in our own lives all the time. Most of us, if we've not been caregivers at some point in our life, we will be at some point in our life. And so this is something that impacts just about everybody. And this is a way to ensure that people are able to be there for family members. Caregivers are the backbone of our long-term care system here in Virginia. A lot of you are familiar with the problems that we have in our nursing homes and other institutional settings where, they're understaffed and they're providing low quality care. And so keeping people in their homes and communities for as long as they're able to be there is really critical. And most people want to remain in their homes and communities. In a lot of cases, you can't do that without the support of a family caregiver. And so making sure that we are taking care of those family caregivers and doing what we can to enable them to provide that care is critically important. And that's going to be kind of our number 2 legislative priority this year after the Prescription Drug Affordability Board bill is instituting this paid family and medical leave program. The next one that I'll get into on this page is establishing presumptive eligibility for Medicaid home and community-based services. This one's a little wonky and always sort of hard to describe, but in essence, when you apply for Medicaid for home and community-based services, so you need some level of care and support, but you don't necessarily rise to the level of needing to be in a nursing facility. You apply, and then before your application is approved, can take up to 45 or even in some cases 90 days. For some people, that is not tenable. They may need care immediately to be able to continue living in their home or community. Nursing facilities will often take a kind of cursory look at your finances and presume eligibility and take you in right away. And then they will get back pay from the state once your full Medicaid approval for being in a nursing facility comes through. Most home and community-based service providers are not financially able to do that. And so what happens is a person maybe doesn't need to be in a nursing home. They could be in their home, but they apply for Medicaid home and community-based services, and then it's going to be 2 months before they actually get approved, and they can't go 2 months without any level of care. And so they go into a nursing home because the nursing home will take them in right away. And what we know about nursing home care is that most people who go into a nursing home never leave. And so the result is we have more people going into nursing homes that need to be there. And that's a problem for a lot of the reasons that I just mentioned. The fact that our nursing facilities are already understaffed, they're not providing high quality care, and most people, don't want to be there in the first place. The other problem is that through Medicaid, providing for nursing home care is about 3 times as expensive as providing for home and community-based care. So what this legislation would do is create a process for presumptive eligibility, where if you apply for Medicaid home and community-based services, you could be presumed eligible and approved for care immediately, while the state is kind of determining your full eligibility. And the state would assume the financial risk of covering you during that period, that 45 or 90 days or whatever it is. Other states have done this and have found that the error rate for these presumptive cases is very low. It's typically 2 or 3% at the highest. So most of the time they get it right. And so the loss in terms of covering somebody who ultimately is deemed ineligible for Medicaid is pretty low. And on the flip side, the savings of covering home and community-based care versus nursing facility care means that ultimately we project that this would save the state significant money while keeping our nursing facilities from becoming overcrowded and giving more people the ability to stay in their home and community like they want to. So this is a big priority for us. Anything that touches Medicaid is going to be a challenge this year because of some of the federal changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so we are working on trying to get the fiscal impact statement right on this. And it may be that this is one of those things that takes a couple of years to get done. but we do think it's something that's really important. Debbie, I assume we have a question
Yeah,
about how you come up.
yeah, yeah. Irv wants to know, is there an estimated cost for Virginia businesses if the legislation on family and medical leave would pass? And the second part is there an estimated cost to the state?
I don't have a fiscal impact statement for this year on that one yet. There is a cost to the state for setting it up, and then the program is paid for through a cost sharing between employers and employees. So there's a payroll deduction from employees to pay for part of it, and then there's a payroll deduction from employers to pay for part of it, and that's a 50-50 split. But there is an exemption for small businesses who are less able to take on that financial burden.
Okay, so Mike Schuster wants to know, does the paid leave bill align with Delegate Converse Fowler bill?
So the patrons for the paid family and medical leave bill are Delegate Brianna Sewell in the House and Senator Jennifer Boysko in the Senate. So I'm not sure what the Converse Fowler bill is that he's referencing.
Okay, that's the questions for now.
Okay. All right, and then moving on past HCBS presumptive eligibility, the next item here is ensuring that nursing homes are providing quality care to residents. I've talked about the problems in our nursing homes, understaffing, lack of accountability. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, does a star rating system for our nursing homes on a 1 to 5 star scale. A nursing home that's rated as 2 stars is below average, and a nursing home that's 1 star is well below average. About 50% of Virginia nursing homes are 1 or 2 star facilities, according to CMS. And so that is a huge problem and something that we need to address. One way that we're going to address that this year is we have a budget amendment to create a free training program for CNAs or certified nurse aides. Those are the people who do most of kind of the day-to-day grunt work in nursing homes of assisting with activities of daily living, helping the individual residents in nursing facilities with all the things that they do throughout the day. We hear constantly from our nursing facilities that they are struggling to find CNAs to hire and staff their facilities. And so we want to create this program that would make it free to become a CNA. It usually costs about $1,200 to $1,300 to get that certification between the books and the classes and the exam and all that. We want to make it completely free to incentivize people to go into this field so that there are enough workers to staff our nursing facilities. And the other positive of that is it creates a pipeline into the healthcare workforce where we need more people in general. So that's one thing that we're going to do. Governor Youngkin created a board on nursing home kind of oversight and accountability that has been meeting for the last couple of months and discussing problems and solutions around nursing facilities. And we are hopeful that there's going to be some legislation that comes out of that board that's recommended to the General Assembly. And we're hopeful that that's something that we'll be able to support as well, but we're kind of waiting to see what that is. I've also heard whispers in recent days that there may be legislation to slightly increase our state staffing standards, which we passed a bill in the 2023 legislative session that instituted staffing standards for the first time in Virginia. It wasn't a great bill. The standards were low, and there were a lot of loopholes and carve-outs for nursing facilities. But it did at least put a floor in place. And there may be an effort this year to raise that floor a little bit, which is something that we would be very likely to support as well. But I'm waiting to find out if that's something that is definitely happening this year or not.
So
Go ahead, Debbie.
So there's a question from Leslie Pendleton. It's a good one. Are members of the General Assembly discussing the federal government's decision to remove nursing and other healthcare professions from the list of professional degrees and the long-term impact on recruitment of quality nursing care in nursing facilities?
I'm sure that they are. The General Assembly is dealing with a lot of fallout from federal actions in a wide variety of issue areas right now. Some of which we'll talk about today, like SNAP and Medicaid, and with nursing facilities under the Biden administration, there was a federal staffing standard rule put in place, which AARP was strongly supportive of, and which would have been a significant improvement over what we have here in Virginia, and that has since been undone. The staffing standard legislation that we passed in 2023 had enactment language in it that said if a federal standard is passed, then this bill goes away, and so that's what happened. But now that the federal law has gone away, our staffing standards at the state level kick back into effect, and so VDH is now kind of scrambling to implement that. It's something that I'm sure that they are discussing, and some of these things, they have levers that they can pull at the state level to address them, and in other cases, they're just going to have to kind of weather the storm of what has happened at the federal level. Any other questions, Debbie?
Not at this time.
Okay. And then the last thing in this section is codifying the Uniform Healthcare Decisions Act. For those who are unfamiliar with the Uniform Law Commission, it is a nationwide group of lawyers who come together and will draft laws that are meant to be passed by every state in the country, is the idea, where particularly in areas like this around advanced care and advanced directives and things like that, there are very different laws from state to state, and it can cause problems sometimes when you have family members in different places or people moving around, and so having more uniform laws between states is really helpful. And so this legislation was one that was created by the Uniform Law Commission very recently. It just came out in full, I guess, the beginning of last year. Only one state has passed it so far, but we're going to look to pass it this year, as well as a number of other states. We actually have pretty good advanced care planning laws in Virginia, but our statutes haven't been updated since 2009, and there are some small but necessary improvements in this one that account for mental health care, put some more updated language in around default surrogates and things like that. Give surrogates the ability to apply for Medicaid on behalf of someone that they are representing. A lot of little things like that, but also AARP is supportive of passing this nationwide in every state. And so it's something that as a state with pretty good advanced care planning laws, Virginia would love to kind of set the example and say, we want to update this and show other states that this is important, that we have uniform law on this throughout the country. And so it's something that we're going to be working on this year. Delegate Patrick Hope is carrying that one for us. Any other questions before I move on to the next section, Debbie?
Not at this time.
All right. We're moving along here. We may get done earlier than I expected. So third part here is safeguard the financial security of older Virginians. And we've got a few things in here. The first one, which is another high priority bill for us, is regulating cryptocurrency kiosks, or what are sometimes referred to as crypto ATMs. Some of you may be familiar with these, some of you are not, but essentially what they are is a machine that looks sort of like an ATM, but on the side it'll say something like CoinFlip or Bitcoin Depot. Those are the two big companies that operate in this space, and they will be placed in local convenience stores and things like that. And it is a kiosk where you can purchase cryptocurrency with cash. The problems with these things are many, but the main thing is that they have become a hotspot for fraud. Because the transactions are relatively anonymous and conducted with cash and irreversible, they have been used by fraudsters to get money out of people, and older Virginians and older people across the country are particularly being targeted. There was a story, I think in August, about a woman in Roanoke who got a phone call and said that she'd missed a grand jury summons and had to pay restitution immediately and to go to this local ATM to make the payment. And she ended up putting in $15,000 in cash before before she was kind of brought to her senses and realized that, wait, this doesn't make sense. This can't be right. And this is something we're seeing all over the country. CNN did a piece on this, and they focused on one particular kiosk in Arizona where something like over $100,000 was lost in the span of a few weeks, I think. Because this is a relatively new thing, it is the Wild West right now. There are just no laws and regulations in place around these crypto kiosks, and so we are working right now with Senator Salim and Delegate Maldonado, who both serve on the Joint Committee of Science and Technologies, like cryptocurrency blockchain subcommittee, to put a bill forward on this issue that would hopefully do a number of different things. The biggest one is setting daily transaction limits. And the lower the limit, the better. Other states have done this. We've seen limits around, $2,000 or so. And what that does is, in the case that someone is defrauded, it limits the amount that they can lose at the very least. So you hear a story about somebody losing $15,000. That can't happen if you've got a $2,000 daily limit. So that's kind of the biggest and most important thing to do there. But it would also require these things to be registered and licensed with the state so that we know where they are and can keep track of them. It would require them to provide warnings about, the risks of using these machines, and, basically giving people a chance to think for a minute before they conduct a transaction. It says, like, if you received a phone call from someone telling you to put money into this, it's not real. So things like that make it so that folks are less likely to be defrauded when using these kiosks. And I think that, this is something that is supported by not only AARP, but also the banking industry supports it, law enforcement supports it. And so I'm very hopeful this is something that we can get done this year. Debbie, any questions about that one before we move on?
No.
Okay. The next one is legislation that we've worked on for a few years now. It would update the Virginia Human Rights Act to sort of equalize age discrimination protections for older workers with other protected classes. There's just weird language in our code right now that sort of differentiates how the law treats discrimination for age versus other issues. So right now it says you're only covered for unlawful firings on categories other than age if you employ more than 5 persons, but for age, it's employers employing more than 5 but fewer than 20 people. So it's only in this one specific age range. And I think that the reason that they initially did it that way was because they thought federal law covered those employers with 20 or more. But there's a difference between, bringing a lawsuit to the state and the federal level, and we want to make sure that those protections are there in state law as well. The bill would also waive sovereign immunity, so it would make it so that state and local governments are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of age or anything else as well. And so that's one that has gotten through the General Assembly the last couple of years, and it was also vetoed by the governor, but we're hoping to bring back and get signed this year. The next one is around SNAP. As I mentioned before, the state is going to be facing a lot of challenges around SNAP based on some of the federal actions that have taken place. The short version of what has been done at the federal level is basically they have put in place rules around your state's error rate in determining who is and isn't eligible for SNAP. And so we determine that at the local level, and then we can kind of go back and audit and figure out what our error rate is. And essentially, if you have a high error rate, you're going to lose a lot of federal SNAP funding. I think our error rate last year was like 13% or something like that. That would result in $300+ million in federal funding lost. And so, if we can get that error rate down, then maybe we don't lose any federal funding, but there seems like a good chance that federal funding on this will be cut. But putting all that aside, the minimum monthly SNAP benefit right now is $23, which is just not reasonable. You can't feed yourself on $23 a month. And we would like to see that raised to $50 a month. And frankly, $50 isn't high enough either, but it's at least a step in the right direction. It may be hard to get this done in 2026 because, just speaking very candidly with you, there's going to be a lot of budget challenges this year. Anything with a big fiscal impact like this is going to have a hard time getting through, because the state is very worried about its bank account and some of the federal impacts. And I know there's concern of a looming recession and things like that. So, this may be something that's hard to get done, but it's something we've supported the last few years and will continue to support. And we're going to ring the bell on this for as long as we have to get it done, because it's just that important. It's so fundamental that people are able to, feed themselves, and something that we're not going to let go of. So we will continue to support this for as long as it takes to make that change. And then the last one, this is a new issue that has just come up in recent weeks. During the 2021 General Assembly session, legislation was passed that was carried by Delegate Luke Torian to create, what we called a work and save program here in Virginia. The program is now called Retire Path Virginia, and it's essentially a state-run IRA that gives workers whose employers do not provide a retirement benefit the option of having part of their salary withheld from their paycheck and deposited into a retirement savings account, an IRA that is run by the state. We know that more and more people are getting to retirement without adequate savings, and that is only going to get worse for subsequent generations. And so giving people an option to put money away for retirement is really important. And doing it via payroll deduction is important too, because if you are contributing out of your own bank account to a retirement savings account, you are less likely to do it. Once that money is in your bank account, particularly if you are someone who's not making a ton of money in the first place, you're very reluctant to say, well, I'm going to take that and go put it in this retirement savings account, because you need it to live your life. But if you have an automatic payroll deduction where the money comes out before it's deposited into your bank account, just on a mental basis, it makes savings easier for people and makes people more likely to save for retirement. And so this was instituted a few years ago, and has been a really successful program so far. There was some pushback from small business groups on this, even though they are not paying for it. And so they compromised at setting the employee threshold for the program at 25 employees, and basically saying that it's mandatory to participate in this if you have 25 or more employees. We would like to see that threshold lowered to 5 employees. And so there is legislation to do that this year that Delegate Torian is going to be carrying once again, that Retire Path is putting forward, that agency that runs this program. And that's something that we want to support so that more people, can participate. Debbie, we have a question?
Yeah, we've got several questions. The
Okay.
first is the SNAP increase bill only for 60 plus individuals?
We would be supportive of an increase for everybody.
Okay. And the second question from John Caskey, well, it's not so much a question. It says he personally inspected several crypto ATMs and found they have clear physical warnings on the outside, but he would support legislation to limit daily transactions, to impose a 1 to 2 delay, maybe, I'm not sure if it's hour or day delay in processing transactions.
Yeah, let
You want to?
me address that one real quickly, because it's a good point. The companies that operate these crypto kiosks have tried to, they can kind of read the writing on the wall that everybody is up in arms about these things. And so they have started to try and address some of the concerns on their own. So some of them do have those physical warnings on the machines, but they're not required. So another company could come up and put in ATMs that don't have those warnings. And so we want to make sure that it's in code that if you're already doing it, great, you don't have to worry about it. But we are going to require that you have these warnings. And we want there to not only be a physical warning on the machine, but also one on the screen as you're making the transaction. And the point about holds is a good one as well. We are supportive of mandatory holds, particularly for new customers where the money is retrievable for a period of time, because once it is deposited, through the blockchain into the other person's account, you can't get it back. And so essentially, if you are defrauded as a new customer, the entity would hold that money for a certain period of time and then could refund it, within 72 hours or whatever the hold period is.
Another question is, how will AARP try to persuade the GA and governor to overcome fiscal concerns regarding our bills? What can the 50 plus community do to support AARP?
Yeah. So I'm going to put a pin in the what can you do to support AARP, because I'm going to get into that at the end a little bit. But to answer the first part of that question, they are going to spend money on some things. So the key is just making sure that we are on that list of priorities where they do want to spend. And some of that is making sure that they know that this is something that the public wants and demands and expects. And that's part of why we did our poll on a number of these issues earlier this year, and have shared and will continue to share the results with legislators to let them know that Prescription Drug Affordability Board, paid leave, all these things are hugely popular with voters, and they expect things to get done on this. In some cases, we will be trying to minimize the fiscal impact in whatever way we can, and that may be like in the case of HCBS presumptive eligibility. Last year, it got a fiscal impact statement put on it that was just totally inaccurate. So trying to work with the agencies that do the fiscal impact statements and getting those to be more accurate, that's part of it. Finding legislation that we can work on that doesn't have a huge fiscal impact. So like, for example, the cryptocurrency kiosk legislation shouldn't cost the state a ton of money. So those are the kinds of things we want to prioritize where we can, that will have an impact without costing the state a lot of money. But for those things that will cost money, just trying to do everything we can to ensure that it is a priority for folks on the money committees making those decisions.
Okay, one last question in this area. Do we know the percentage of Virginia seniors on SNAP benefits who are responsible for supporting grandchildren who live with them?
I don't know the number offhand for that, but anecdotally, we hear from a ton of members who are part of what we call the sandwich generation in some cases, where they are both caring for older people in their family and younger people in their families. Maybe caring for a parent and a child, or caring for a grandchild and a parent, or caring for a spouse. And there's so many different combinations with caregivers where folks are having to take care of multiple people other than themselves. And for those who are low income and rely on SNAP to keep food on the table, not just for themselves, but maybe for a loved one, that is obviously hugely important.
No other questions right now.
All right. Thanks, Debbie. And with that, we will move along to the final section here, which is making Virginia communities affordable for everybody. We want to make sure that people can keep a roof over their head. We want people to be able to stay in their homes. This is we've talked about a lot of things that are just fundamental to living a good life. We want people to be able to age the way that they want to age. And part of that is being able to afford the medicine that you need to live a good life. Part of that is being able to keep food on the table. Part of that is being able to keep a roof over your head. And so a few things in that area. The first is preventing evictions by extending the pay or quit period for renters from 5 to 14 days. This is legislation that we have supported for the last 2 or 3 years now that has been vetoed by the governor. And essentially, the way it would work is that within once you begin eviction proceedings, there is currently a 5-day waiting period that has to take place. And we want to extend that to 14 days to make it more likely that waiting period will intersect with a pay period for the renter. Because if it intersects with a pay period, then you're able to take some of that money and hopefully make the payment on your home and avoid eviction. And that's the priority here is to avoid evictions to the greatest extent possible. We don't want people getting kicked out on the street And so it going from 5 to 14 days, what feels like a relatively minor change, significantly increases the possibility that folks will be able to get their head back above water and make that payment and be able to stay in their homes. And so that's something we're going to support again this year. The next one is legislation from Delegate Reeser. That previous bill on evictions, by the way, Delegate Sia Price has carried that the last couple of years, and Senator Aaron Rouse carried it last year as well. The next one is from Delegate Reeser, and this gives localities the ability to negotiate affordable units for new assisted living developments. This bill is totally permissive. It's just saying localities can do this. It's saying that if a developer wants to build a new assisted living facility in your locality, you are empowered to negotiate with them and say, okay, you can build, but in order to get the permit to build, you have to set aside a certain number of affordable units. The cost of assisted living is becoming a bigger and bigger problem for people. And for those who don't know, Medicaid will cover a nursing home. So if you rise to the level of care where you need to be in a nursing facility, you can Medicaid will pay for it if you financially qualify, and generally that requires spend down in some cases, and making sure that you're sadly you have to be poor enough to qualify for Medicaid to have that cover your nursing home stay, and a lot of people end up having to essentially impoverish themselves to be able to go into a nursing home, which is a problem in and of itself. That's kind of where we are, but you can get Medicaid to pay for it. Medicaid will not pay for assisted living. So the only kind of financial resource that we have in Virginia for assisted living is what's called the auxiliary grant program. And that's about $2,000 a month, and the average cost of assisted living is like $7,000 a month. So it's not adequate, and the cost of assisted living is just out of reach for a lot of people. So if you don't qualify for nursing home level care, or you don't qualify for Medicaid, and you need to be in an assisted living facility, that's just not financially viable for a lot of people. And so having some more affordable units for folks is a big priority in the assisted living space. And then finally, ensuring that the affordable housing supply meets demand. And there's a lot of ways to do this. AARP has supported legislation around accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, in recent years, where we want to make it easier for people to build those if they want to have a caregiver or someone that they're caring for live with them on their property in an accessory dwelling unit. Schuyler Van Valkenburg is working on a bill right now that we are hopeful to support, that basically asks localities to increase their housing stock and sets some things in there that basically says, like, if you can't increase your housing stock, we ask you to do at least X number of the following X things, which is basically like local zoning changes that make it easier for new developments or for ADUs or things like that. And the language on that is still being worked out, but we have a housing affordability crisis in Virginia, and a lot of it is that there's just not enough housing, and a part of the reason for that is that a lot of local zoning laws are very restrictive in where and what you can build. And that makes it hard to ensure that there is enough housing to meet the demand, and that's what helps bring prices down, is when you have enough housing to meet the demand. And so we're going to be working with Senator Van Valkenburg on that bill, and we'll take a look at anything else in this space that deals with housing affordability as well. Debbie, questions on any of those things?
No questions.
All right. All right, so that is the last section of our legislative agenda. I will do one more. If you have questions, type them in before we get done here. But the last thing I want to address, which was brought up earlier, is how can I help? What can we do? And so there's a few things that I wanted to talk about today. The first is very simple. I'd ask that everybody who is watching today or watching the recording later on text Join VA to 22777, and that will subscribe you to AARP's text messages about our advocacy work. You'll get some from our national office about the work that they're doing at the national level on issues that impact people over 50. and you'll get texts from us during the General Assembly session about the work that we are doing on behalf of Virginians over 50. And often those texts will be opportunities for you to support our legislative agenda. So just as an example, when we got the Prescription Drug Affordability Board legislation through the last couple of years, we knew that the governor was considering vetoing the bill, and we wanted him to hear from as many people as possible that this was something that mattered a lot to them. And so we sent out a text message. It says, call the governor, email the governor, let him know that you want him to sign Prescription Drug Affordability Board legislation. And as a result of that, the governor got hundreds of phone calls. We actually shut down his phone line for a day because he was getting so many calls, and thousands of emails from people asking him to please sign the bill. He did ultimately veto the bill. The year that we had all those contacts come in, I think he vetoed it at like 11 o'clock at night, the day before the deadline, like try to do it as quietly as possible because he knew it was unpopular. But those are the kinds of things that you can expect from us, is we will give you updates on, we're at a critical inflection point for this particular piece of legislation. Here is how you can help us. Here's what your support can do for us. And giving you opportunities to send emails or make phone calls without having to get up off the couch. We don't need you to come to Richmond necessarily, but you can take these small actions that when a lot of people do it, it makes a big difference. And we've really worked hard to grow our text message list because it's just the best way to communicate with people. If you're like me, you get a million emails every day and you don't read through all of them. But like if I get a text message notification, I see that and I can ignore it or not, but I see it. And so it gives folks the opportunity to just easily see on your phone, like, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's how you can help. And so it's hugely helpful to us if folks sign up for those text message alerts. And I'd ask that if you're able to, please do that. And you just text Join VA to 22777 and you can subscribe for the text messages that way. The next thing is paying attention, staying informed, knowing who your elected officials are. This seems like such a basic thing, and if you are on this webinar, then you're already probably doing this. You probably already care enough that you're doing these things, but not enough people do. Particularly when we talk about state and local government, we're always very fixated on what's going on in Washington and the president and Congress and all the things happening there, and quite often what's happening there is very little. Whereas the General Assembly is going to meet for 60 days, and in those 60 days, they're going to pass something like 2,300 pieces of legislation, many of which will have a direct impact on your life. And a lot of people just don't pay any attention or know anything about that. And the fewer people pay attention, the less pressure there is on elected officials to do the things that really have a positive impact for our members and for consumers. And so if they know that people are paying attention, if they're hearing from their constituents about this, they're much more likely to take a position that we want them to. And so I would encourage you to reach out, know who your senator is, know who your delegate is, reach out to them and let them know. Call their office and leave a message, send an email. If you're reaching out to, say, Senator Mark Warner or Tim Kaine, they're hearing from a lot of people all the time, and they've got a lot of staff who are kind of going through those emails. These elected officials in the state legislature have one or two staffers usually, and if they get a bunch of emails about something, their staffer will tell them about it. They know about these things. They are much more accessible than members of Congress are. And outside of the General Assembly session, when they're a little less busy, they will often sit down and have coffee with you. And so I encourage you, try to get to know them, try to develop a relationship with your elected official if you can. A great way to do all these things is through an organization called VPAP, the Virginia Public Access Project. So I would encourage everyone to go to vpapvpap.org and familiarize yourself with that website. You can look up who your elected officials are on that website. If you don't know, you can type in your address and it'll tell you who your elected officials are. You can sign up for a service that's called VA News, which is a daily email that comes to you with a headline and a paragraph about all the kind of big news stories of the day going on in Virginia, and that's a free service that everybody like myself who works in Virginia politics and policy gets, like literally everybody. And it's a great, easy way to just kind of skim through and see what's going on every day. And then there's a wealth of other resources on that website. So it's a really good organization, and so I would encourage folks to go to that website, check it out, and sign up for VA News if you want to stay informed. But just staying plugged in. The other thing you can do is you can follow along with the General Assembly session if you have the time and the interest online without being in Richmond. You can go to what's called LIS, which is Legislative Information System, or the Virginia General Assembly website. And through there, you can stream their daily floor sessions of the House and the Senate. You can stream committee meetings, and in some cases, subcommittee meetings. You can look up bills and follow along with bills and see what's going on. And so if you want to really stay plugged in, that's a great way to do that. And I encourage people to do that kind of throughout the General Assembly session, because the more plugged in you are, the more impact we will have. And so that's critical. And then the last thing is just voting in every single election. There are a lot of lobbyists in the General Assembly, and most of them are giving money to these elected officials. They work for businesses that donate money, or they work for organizations that donate money. And so the currency of their influence is actual currency. AARP does not do that. We do not give any money to any candidates at any level. We do not endorse candidates at any level. We are very, very firm about our nonpartisan status. And so the currency of our influence is people. We don't give money, but we have 1 million members in Virginia. No other organization can say that. And more than that, we have 1 million members who vote regularly in every single election. We have accessed the voter file in the past to show elected officials what percentage of voters in their district in their most recent election were, over 50. And not surprisingly, the Virginians over 50 are the most reliable voters in every single election. And so by continuing to vote and participate in the electoral process, you are empowering us to do this work on your behalf in the General Assembly, and allowing us to continue saying, like, our people, our members, they are the most reliable voters in the state. They pay attention and they care. And so please keep that in mind when you are deciding what your position is going to be on this priority issue for us. And so, we're obviously through the most recent election, but it's really crucially important to vote in every election. So I can't emphasize that enough. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see, Debbie, do we have any other questions in the Q&A before we adjourn here?
There are no other questions. I think we had some good ones.
Fantastic. Yeah, the questions were great. Thank you so much to everybody who attended today. Thank you for engaging with us and for your questions. Once again, you will receive a follow-up email from this webinar with information, and we will include a link to our digital version of this legislative agenda so that you can go through it and take a look, and just know that we will be in the General Assembly fighting every day for you here in Richmond, and sign up for those text message alerts so that you can help support us if you want to along the way. With that, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.